I'm the director of Track 16, Sean Meredith. Happy to have the founder of Track 16, Tom Patchett, sitting in the back row. Probably, consulting the artist before the talk and such. And then Cesar, many of you know, is on the camera there. And it's really a great pleasure to have these three people showing here. I've known them for various amounts of time. I know, Martian, we met in like a cabal of puppetry, and I can remember the first conversation we had at a house somewhere in the hills that had a pool, and we were all grateful to have this house we could go to once in a while and swim and such.
I terrified your daughter.
Yeah. I scared your daughter, Sean. I said, I know. And he was like, you have a notebook there, Sean. Can I see how you use your notebooks? I was like, I'm not showing you my notebooks. Come on, I want to know. He's like, he was big into notebooks at the time and wanted to know. I was like, but I didn't want to. I was like, no, I write in here. I'm not sure.
I thought
But it's, but then I got intrigued when my childhood ice cream choice, Carvel, became his grad project at CalArts. And yes, it's been nice to then come full circle and after a couple years ago talk about doing a show. And Simone, Lori, the previous director of Track 16, showed some of Simone's work back at Bergamot Station, and I was always intrigued with it. It was very mysterious to me. And then when I met Simone, the first night we chatted, she was telling me about, she had just done some commercial for Facebook, because she's an actress too, and I was like, I've never seen a Facebook commercial, what are you talking about? And so she shows me this thing on the thing, and it's this family having a dinner party. I might not have all the details right, but I'm watching it, and I'm like, it's the whole family watching their phones, because Simone is telling a super boring story. That's outrageous. It's like, it makes no sense or whatever, I don't know. And so I was like, and at the end I watched it, I was like, thought it was hilarious. And I was like, well, Simone, who wrote that for you, that story that you had to read? And she's like, they just told me to tell a story. That'll be convincing for the family to look at their phone. So
come over here.
But she has been, I'm very honored because she always is talking about Track 16 in such nice ways, and I love her work, and I'm particularly happy to show these paintings because I think they're also great. And a lot of people know her drawings, her collages, but I find these to be super amazing. Hey, John Fleck. And so it was originally these two that I thought to put together. There was something about this obsessive experience of creating. And then, when I was talking about having somebody, a third person for the show, it was Martian who actually mentioned Debra, and I was like, I've gotten recently to know Debra, but I'd known her work for like a year it was one of the first artists I've ever shown that I first saw her work on Instagram. Because I would see these creepy, because these guys are creepy in their own way, but her earlier work was, that some of you might know is very interspecies. So sometimes from animal into flower, sometimes horse to person, all kinds of, and she, sometimes I've had a hard time explaining her work to people because people see it. I've listened to people explain to their friends how she must have 3D printed them. I've had people tell me how she must have made her molds. And I have to explain that these are secondhand ceramics that she has bought and dismantled with Dremels and tools, and and then put back together and then repaired them as if they were never, as if they were made that way initially, as if someone made molds and produced them like this. It kind of boggles their minds because the craftsmanship is so amazing. So anyway, I'm really happy to put them together in the show, and then. Marcus, I will let him tell the story, but there was, besides him being good, because he's known Martian and Simone for a long time, he also, told me this great story about when he met Simone that I'll make him tell. But I'm going to quickly read about Marcus slightly, because I've known Marcus for a long time. I was like, I want to do a better intro this time. I'm going to do a better intro than I normally do. Normally I'm just flippant and walk off. So Marcus I've known for a long time from coming to Track 16, working sometimes at Track 16, performing at Track 16, but sometimes there's somebody you know so much and you talk so much and you realize there's a lot you don't know about them. So I just looked up Marcus really, who is our moderator tonight. But he's founded, and co-founded and co-founding artist of a lot of organizations like the 18th Street Art Center, Highways Performance Space, Viva the Nation's, I'm reading even things because I really wanted to get this shit right. Viva, the nation's first Latino gay and lesbian arts organization. He's performed all over the place, of course, including Red Cat and Art Taper Forum at USC and UCLA and Track 16, Red Cat, Highways, and on and on. So I first saw Marcus hosting something, and was it called Pop-Tarts? When you hosted the puppetry day that had because I went to see
Puppet Terror.
Yeah, because I saw
have the tattoo.
It was when Zaloom was doing maybe the Punch and Jimmy show, and so I went to see that, and he just did such like an honorable, amazing introduction to Paul. Zaloom was a close friend of mine. About this sort of there's very very loving intro to him, and I was like, who's this guy who's just like really. Loving everything that he's curating, loving everybody he's introducing tonight, and then later on it took me to being like, I've seen that guy before when he came to Track 16. But he has a residency right now at 18th Street Art Center, and it's culminating in something that I will quickly read. He's working on a multi-source. This is pretty much maybe what he wrote or someone wrote. So this is a multi-source project, Macho Stereo, based on the 1955 novel Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo. I'm not sure if I said Rulfo right, but the story, which hinges on the reunion between an estranged father and son, has been influential in Latin America but remains largely unknown in the United States. He'll create a performance and installation at the Atrium Gallery at the 18th Street Art Center, and he's basing it on interviews, and he'll maybe have him explain how he's been doing this, but he's spending his days trying to understand father-son relationships through all of these interviews that are super tough, and he even had a tough day today with it and stuff like that. So he's working on really cool stuff right now.
I'm cruising men in the library to come into a private room and tell me about their fathers. So I have the skill set for that already.
So without further ado, Marcus will introduce them.
Well, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean. Well, I'm thrilled and honored to be here and to moderate this discussion. I was like, I'm kind of an over-preparer, and I got all nervous. And then I thought, well, you know what? I just gotta kind of drive the car because these three people had a lot to say, as you can already see by the work. And so I think we'll start by each person taking some time, a few minutes to talk about their work, and then the four of us will have a discussion, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. But before we do that, I want to tell the story of how I met Simone. I met Simone in junior high school. I was able to go to Cal State LA and get college credit and take courses with adults at that time. And I was in a pre-accelerated college enrollment program at the time. It was 1981. Wow. I was 81 or 82, but she had a show at Cal State LA, and I was a teenager, and I went to my very first art opening, and it was Simone Gad's art opening. And I went to this opening, and at the time she was showing these assemblages that had pink flamingos and Christmas lights and like so Hollywood. And I was like a teenager from Huntington Park, and I saw Simone, and I saw the work, and I saw all these wonderful, fabulous people at an art opening, Los Angeles, Bohemia, and I thought to myself, when I grow up, I want to be like Simone, and I want to be part of that world and part of that scene. And I was just a young little faggot, teenage boy, wow. And then, fast forward, I'm 54, and Simone's 55, and here we are. So I'm really, really especially honored to be here today to moderate a panel that includes Simone, who's inspired me since I was a teenage little fat kid. So thank you so much. And the end of the story, there's a photo here somewhere of the Polaroids behind Martian of what Simone, 1980, how, you know, the Simone I met.
70s.
The Simone I met. But I don't look like how you met me either, so, you know.
I don't look like that either.
No, we both don't. And we're both on canes.
Exactly.
I know. So thank you, darling.
Thank you.
So did you want to go first?
Okay, you want me to?
You don't have to.
If you don't want to, I'll do
Can
it.
Debra go first?
Yeah, I'll
Okay,
go first.
Deborah, you go first.
It's okay, I'll go first and then everybody else can feel more comfortable. So hopefully everybody's gotten a chance to check out the back gallery. So those works in the back are mine. There's 25 little white rabbits. So each of those rabbits, I purchased them off eBay and I've altered each one of them to make them into something different than what they originally were, yet still maintaining their rabbitness. So normally what I do in my work is I collect objects from thrift stores, I cut them apart and I put them back together to make new things. I do ceramics restoration as well, so I use the techniques of ceramics restoration to make the works appear like they were born that way. And that's why when you look at the works in the back, you're not going to see seams, or lines from molds or anything like that, because each of those things was something that was produced as an original that I've cut apart and, like Sean said, essentially repaired to make it look as you see it now. And so the way the work began, I have an art degree and I was doing a lot of collage work and collecting of things and painting. I grew up in the Midwest and my grandma created a lot of ceramics herself. Her sister had a production ceramics shop in the 60s, and so I grew up with lots of ceramic animals that were very cute and very sweet, and we had all of them for all of the holidays, and I collected them, and they were things that we loved, and they were things that we cared for and things we appreciated. And as I grew and learned more about art, I learned that the things that the people that I knew that were in my family, the things that they loved, were not necessarily seen as art anywhere. A lot of them were seen as garbage, essentially, or things that people didn't really want, or they were silly, they were kitsch, they were just a throwaway. And it always made me sad because I loved those things. I loved growing up with them. I loved getting them out each season and seeing them again, and you know, like your friends. And after I learned to do restoration technique, that was something I just fell into. I moved to Austin. I had no job. Happened to find an ad on the internet for someone who was looking for somebody to teach ceramics restoration to. And I met him, picked up the technique. And once I did that, I was out in the thrift stores looking for things like I always did. I found these two little lambs, and something in my mind just said, look what you can do now. And in that whole time, I found the lambs probably in the, maybe around 2007. And previous to that, you know, lots of you know about the cloning of Dolly the sheep. That was like a huge thing that happened in the late 90s. And people were so afraid, like science made people scared, like there's this clone and it's gonna be crazy, it's gonna ruin everything, we're gonna have all these freak animals everywhere, it's gonna be awful. And there was so much fear. And instead of people being excited about the possibility, people were afraid of what would happen. And when I was in this thrift store and I saw these two little lambs, I was thinking about Dolly the sheep, and I was thinking about people being afraid, and just thinking like, why be afraid? I just knew I could do something wonderful that was interesting, and took this object that was benign, like so benign that it was throwaway, and make it into something that people really looked at. And even if they looked at it with this sense of concern or wonder, or like not understanding what it was, at least they were looking at it. It wasn't something that they were just ready to throw away. And that's how the ceramics began. And for this particular show, it was really fabulous to have this opportunity, and I'm so glad that Marsian brought me into this whole thing, because initially with Sean, I said, oh, I'll display a variety of works, things I normally show with more hybridized animals. I was going to show some birds with some flower heads and some other types of objects. And then instead I remembered these 2 little rabbits that I found about 10 years ago. They had a sticker on the bottom, so I knew how to identify the manufacturer. And I'd always loved that form. So I thought, hey, I'm gonna make, maybe 5 or 6 of those. So I started buying the rabbits off eBay, and I made a few, and then I made a few more, and then I bought a few more, and then I bought some more. And then at a certain point, I realized that it should only be rabbits. And so I went to Sean and I said, hey, you know how I was gonna do a show? Well, and now can it just be rabbits? And can I paint the wall pink? Because I think it would just look wonderful. And he said fine, which was awesome. And that's how it came to be. And I knew I would need to make at least 20. There's 25 that I made, which is more work than I normally produce in an entire year. These 25 rabbits. So this was a big project for me, and it was really interesting going through this iteration to see how I could change that form and what I could do with it, and sort of just testing myself and pushing myself forward into what a certain form could be. So I think that basically sums it up.
Well, I'm an Easter baby.
Oh, I am also an Easter baby.
I'm an Easter baby.
Yeah,
I'm a Pisces. I had an early Easter my birth year.
But I know Simone and Martian, but when I walked in and I first was greeted by the chorus of dolls there, and the work, and then I came to see your work, and it just I was already blown away, and then to see the bunnies to me are just such a important symbol, like my whole life of being an Easter baby. And so I'm wondering, did you
I'm sorry, time out. Were you conceived on Easter or born on Easter?
This is our time right now. We get to
I yield my time back.
Thank you, Maxine.
It's like the Senate in here.
So, I'm wondering about the bunnies in particular, because you spent so much time with them. I've looked at your other work, and this is the first time you've done such a deep dive into one animal or one kind of thing.
Yes.
So I'm really curious about how you feel after this deeper dive. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so the white rabbit specifically. I mean, for me, the white rabbit is Easter, but really what the white rabbit is the white rabbit is the thing that led Alice into Wonderland. The white rabbit is something that you chase, and it takes you to the realm of possibility. And so I think that's where the attraction with me and the white rabbit is the white rabbit is a symbol of everything that you never thought was possible is possible somewhere else. And then on top of that particular thing, that's the most important part to me, but it's also the symbol of Easter and resurrection, which I think is really interesting to be able to take apart and resurrect a form. And every time I repair something and every time I make something, it is a resurrection, which is just an interesting element about being able to do this type of work, to be the person that can destroy and recreate. And then on top of that, a white rabbit is also, it's a genetic anomaly. I mean, it's an albino. And that type of genetic anomaly is always looked at in sort of a suspicious way. It's also the animal that's used for testing and things like that. So I think that in that instance, that's why that rabbit is important to me, that it has a symbol all of its own. And for this, I loved that form so much, and I loved that idea of the realm of possibility, that's how I really got into thinking that the white rabbit was where it was at for trying to stretch the form. I mean,
Yeah.
it's animal testing,
Yeah.
it's resurrection, it's the realm of possibility.
It's fucking everything.
It's the perfect form to be able to stretch into whatever you want it to be. And it was really interesting for me to see there are very particular challenges that you find when you're trying to cut things up and put them back together seamlessly as to what is possible and what can be possible and what will look natural. So that did become a challenge. Or at a certain point, I think when I was around rabbit number 20, I thought I was at 20 and I was only at 19. And I realized I was starting to get a little bit slight on ideas, or I had some ideas, but I was just kind of getting tired of rabbits. And so, but I needed to produce more. And so just having to get over that hump. And had I had 6 months to produce this show instead of maybe about 2 months, maybe even 6 weeks, that made a big difference. Like really, a lot of times what I do when I'm making work is I'll cut things apart, put them back together in an informal way, and then just leave them until I need to finish. With this particular work, I had to cut things apart and finish them immediately, which was a very different type of process for me, which made the production and the and then just even the idea creation process was a lot more fast, and it made it a lot more difficult in some ways to try to say, like, I need to make this certain form different from the next, and different from the next, and different from the next, and each of them had to be divergent enough to be an individual.
So last question for you. I have more, but I'll get to them later. Which is your favorite bunny? My favorite bunny is the one with like all of the ears.
Yes.
Like that one is just like Queen Bunny. You're kind of like, in a way, it's like the RuPaul of the bunnies in a way. Like it's like this drag of ceramics where like you're like refabulizing these things, and I imagine each one like going down the runway and being like eaten alive by Michelle Visage. But they're gorgeous. So my favorite one is that one. And then I'm curious, which is your least favorite? Which is your least favorite? Because there's got to be one. 25. I mean, come on.
Okay. So really, my most favorite, I think, is the one I do love the one with all the ears, because that's sort of like the maximum. So there is a maximum, which is the one with all the ears. Then there's a really severe minimum, which is the one that's in the case next to all the ones on the shelves. I call it the snowman. It has no ears, no arms, no bottom feet, and no tail. So it's really just.
But it's your favorite? Or your least favorite?
It's neither. So there's one extreme and then the other.
Uh-huh.
My favorite is there's one that has an ear sticking out of her eye. She has one ear sticking up, one ear sticking out where her eye should be. I call her Left Eye, which is a weird reference to TLC.
I love Left Eye Lopez. Puerto Rican, hello.
No, I mean, not, it's just, I just felt like she had like that type of personality.
Uh-huh.
I really loved that particular rabbit. I think it was probably the 4th or 5th one I made, and I just loved how easily that iteration came together and how she looked when she was done, and how just sassy she seemed. So she's my favorite one. Let's
Least
see.
favorite.
My least favorite
And
one.
then we gotta move on.
Boy, okay. I'll try to think. Maybe I'll just make up an answer right now. My least favorite one, that's really hard to do.
I think it's the one you love the most.
Yeah, maybe it is also the one I love the most.
I thought it was the hardest one to make because all those little tiny ears would have been fucking
No, I
nightmare.
mean, I think sometimes the hardest one to make isn't necessarily, I don't know that I have a least favorite form. Like, there's several of them that I can understand why people, like, I know the ones without eyes, people find the ones that have no eyes at all really terrifying. And I find those really amusing, but I can also, yes, I personally, yeah, I find those really funny, but I know the one, there's one that has a tail on its face and it doesn't have any eyes.
I like that one too.
And it has, so it's kind of like a
Butt
double, because
face.
it has ears on its back and tail on its
That's
back.
an eye, because there's
And
a
it-
butt under that tail.
Right.
That's an eye.
And I think that
That's a Cyclops bunny.
I would guess that that's probably the one that people find most disturbing, so I'm just gonna answer your question and say that would be like the least liked overall, just because it's so,
Is that the anal blossom one?
no, that is not
It's
that
my
one.
favorite. I know
That's-
it's not
Oh,
my
of
type.
course you do. The
That's-
prolapse bunny.
Yeah.
That's my mom's favorite until she watches this on Facebook Live.
Well, thank you. Do you want to go next, Simone?
Sure.
Hit it.
Okay. My family and I came from Belgium in 1951. They were Holocaust survivors. My whole family were in the concentration camps and forced labor and in the ghettos. We settled in Boyle Heights, and my mother got me into showbiz instantly when I was 4 years old. So I became a Magdalene Kitty and grew up in Hollywood. Magdalene Kitty was a studio where Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney went to study acting, singing, piano, dance, where I went, but I sucked at acrobatics and everything except for tap dancing, and I loved acting, and I was a so-so singer. I'm starting off with this because I grew up in Hollywood, and I quit acting many times because I had a lot of difficulty as an ingenue and child and teenage actress, in that there were molestations and really dark pedophilia stuff that I had to fight. Then I got involved in the art world as a young adult. I couldn't afford to go to art school, but Wallace Berman and Al Hansen were my first mentors, and Al Hansen got me involved in the Fluxus movement in 1972. So I had been a fiber artist, a fabric artist. My father was a custom European tailor. The whole family were tailors. And he was the first person who taught me how to draw. I learned how to draw a camel and a house when I was a little girl. So art stuck with me, and I decided very early on that I wanted to have an art and acting career, which was very taboo because you were only allowed to have one career or you were considered a dilettante. So I was fighting that, but I knew inherently that I had to do both, that my art would save me with the acting when things were difficult, and then back and forth. And I would go to Fredericks of Hollywood, and I fell in love with the catalogs of the sexy girls that were negligees, and they were nude underneath, and also sexy corsets and bras. So that stuck with me. And then years later, I found myself, many years later, starting to make the pinups with animal rescue drawings, because I've always loved animals of all kinds, but I wasn't allowed to have a pet at home. Neither was my brother. And I had a deep, deep love for animals, which I carry to this day, and I feel that they're the best part of us. I pair the pinups with the animals, and they protect each other. And the pinups they start off from circa 1850s to 1970s, which includes some of my self-portraits with the Polaroids, some of which are over here. That's one of them with the red parrot. And then there's a couple of others. There's an Airways with a black bunny. I did a collaboration with the late John Schroeder in the 70s and Joe and Rick Potts at Otis. I was modeling at that time and showing my work. I was starting to show my work in museums and galleries. Because I had to make a living, and I hadn't decided to go back to acting until later in life, in my 40s. And then when I got back into acting, I decided to stick with it and do both careers for the rest of my life. So I met Lori in 2010. Actually, I met her way early, a lot in years before that. I always loved Track 16, and I had a strong feeling that I could connect with this venue. And then I was in touch with Lori for a long time. Then she invited me to lunch in Chinatown, and she asked me to bring this new series of pinups with animals, and I was working with Sharpies at that time. So then Lori told me that she wanted to include me in Track 16 for the punk show, and she gave me a beautiful installation. And they're here, some of them. The gallery kept the early ones, which are at the bottom.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is really great. And then Sean invited me to do a 2 or 3 person show here, so, which was really thrilling for me. And then I worked on the rest of the series. It's a combination of French lesbian pinups from the 40s and 50s that Pierre Picot sent me from Paris in a magazine. So I cut up the whole magazine to make that series. There included all of them here. And then Elmer Batters, who was a sailor in the 40s during World War II. And then he formed a club, a photography club of amateur photographers, and started taking photographs of models from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And he had a big foot fetish. So I included, they're included here too. He loved feet and shoes and stockings. So, and then he'd work up higher and higher to the rest of the body. Then the paintings, in the early 1990s, because I've been doing this career for 56 years, and I showed in New York with Monique Knowlton when I was doing my assemblage Hollywood pieces, and my work is archived in MoMA PS1 from 1980 forward, and also at the One Library at USC. But at any rate, I started showing with a gallery on Santa Monica Boulevard, and I had made a series of pinups with little bits of facades of buildings, vintage buildings from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, because I love architecture. And she suggested that I start painting buildings without collage too, as a separate series. So I started making small ones, and then they got bigger and bigger. And then I made the Chinatown series when I was showing with a gallery, L2 Contemporary. So I took pictures of Chinatown Plaza, the pagodas there, and the food dogs, and they turned into an extensive series from that. But going back a little bit to the early 70s, I had a Chinese boyfriend that I was madly in love with, who took me to dim sum every Sunday. And that stayed with me. And then seeing the difference between Brussels and Chinatown just inspired me so much from childhood. And I would go to the souvenir shops and buy tchotchkes in the souvenir stores for my early assemblages. And my mom collected all kinds of kitsch, Belgian kitsch, Polish kitsch, Japanese, English bone china. So I was surrounded by that all these years. And kitsch became, I sniffed it and it fell into my body.
I love that word. You sniffed it.
I sniffed it.
Well, what I love about your work, well, we're both in Asher Hartman's, members of Asher Hartman's theater company, God Awful Theater Company. And as you already heard, I've known Simone since I was a child. But it's interesting because we kind of have a similar history. Like my family was from Boyle Heights. They came from Puerto Rico to Boyle Heights.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I know, right, girl? And then also, it's like you had Wallace Berman and Al Hansen. I had Tim Miller and Linda Burnham. And one of my heroes sitting here, John Fleck.
I love John.
You know.
I do too.
And so it's like, I always felt like I've always like kind of been like walking behind you in a way. And what I love about this exhibition, kudos to Track 16, like I always felt like Track 16 to me was always like the quintessential like Los Angeles gallery. Like I always felt like the shows at Track 16 really reflected Los Angeles culture. And I have not, and I'm a Hollywood High graduate, Los Angeles native. I have not seen an exhibition that for me kind of really reflected sort of like the reality of living in the weird like rabbit hole of Los Angeles. So what I'm curious about, Simone, it's like you guys have this in common, but you were talking about the rescuing. It's kind of like you rescue these ceramics from the thrift store or from the horrors of eBay, and like you kind of rescue and then sort of re-trigger the dolls, and then So I'm curious about like the rescue aspect. Also, like I was also raped and molested, and then I love a good rape joke. Thank God for performance art. Like I'm better now because of all the therapy and performance art.
Me
but
too.
It's like I love seeing how you rescue these images of women and animals and architecture and then put them together. So can you talk a little bit about the rescue aspect of your work?
Well, I believe Chinatown to me, I hope that it stays forever, but so much of the architecture of Los Angeles has disappeared, and I feel it's part of me and my responsibility as an artist with the way I work to rescue Chinatown in my work. And I also made a series of Victorian buildings and craftsmen. And then Belgium too. Belgium Art Nouveau facades, because I have a strong connection there as well throughout these years. So the more of Los Angeles that disappears, the more I'm driven to make paintings to save them in a painting, even though I can't save them in life as much as I would like to.
Don't you feel like, I feel like when I see like an empty lot, like the part of me as a native, like that I disappeared. Like when I see an empty lot and I can't remember exactly what was there, it freaks me out, and I have to go look it up and like remember,
Me too.
Yeah, but yeah, I see it. Well, and because you did other works that were more architectural, like I remember your paintings of the Guggenheim. I actually created a show of Crazy Space. You had a show, Crazy Space.
Crazy Space.
I think Asher created that show.
Asher
right?
curated
that show.
yes.
Yeah. But those are beautiful, and those are based on architecture. If
Yes,
I recall
they are,
correctly.
because with pinups, saints, and architecture, exactly. And then from there, I developed the paintings separately as well, as a separate series. But to me, they all are part of the rescue, like you said. And I also make male pinups as well.
Yeah, you owe me a piece.
Okay.
But I love these themes of damage and loss and erasure that occur in your work.
Oh, thank you.
That also occur in all three of your works. It's
Yes.
like all about this damage and loss and erasure, and like sort of refabulizing, which I think is what Los Angeles is about. As a native, I get so mad at all these people that come here and they're like, "Oh, you're from here?" Well, there's a lot of us that are from here. It's like all you people from everywhere else kind of ruined it for us. But I love looking.
Sorry.
Well, you have a pass because hello, bunnies. But the work in this exhibition really speaks to me like Los Angeles, and sort of how this idea of reinvention in terms of the ceramics, and this idea of like Raggedy Ann and Mandy, those were originally African American dolls. I don't know if you knew this, but the original Raggedy Ann and Andy were black dolls, and they got so popular that then they made them into white dolls. But you can look this up. It's actually, this is true.
And there's a misconception that they're
Wait, hang on.
anti-vaxxers. Okay.
Anti-vaxxers?
Yeah. You can look it up.
I'll look it up.
Okay.
Back to Simone.
Back to Simone.
So, can you tell me, Simone?
It's true.
I'm curious about your early days as an actress in Hollywood, and sort of how those experiences, like, because I know you, and then I look at your work and I've seen your performances, and then I get reminded of, like, I look at your work and I can't not think of you performing.
Oh.
And so I'm curious about, like, the performative aspects around your work, and, like, sort of what inspires your performances, and then what inspires these collages.
Well, the collages, in a sense, even though they're about other women who are vulnerable models and struggling to earn a living, even prostituting themselves, from the 1850s, because that was the only way they could earn a living besides maybe teaching or being a housewife at a farm or a ranch. But that was their sole sense of survival. The ones that chose that, or it was chosen for them because of abuse or probably abuse. But these are, in a sense, self-portraits.
No, I see that.
Yeah. Because they transcend porn. To me, they're not pornographic. They're erotic, certainly, but they go a lot deeper.
I feel like you're giving them back their dignity.
That's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah, well, you hit the target.
Oh, thank you. That was my intention.
Yeah, you did it, girl.
Thank you. And as an actress, I'm still acting, and in fact, I worked on a film with John a few years ago.
What film was it?
It was by a Swedish director.
Oh, right.
Now
Of course it was a Swedish director. Wait, my last question for you, Simone, though, is, and of course you know me, so you know it's going to be completely inappropriate.
Inappropriate is...
Why the lesbians?
Oh, why the lesbians?
Because you said lesbian porn, which of course is like, I mean, whose ear does that term not tickle, right? So explain.
Well, since childhood, I had an attraction for women, girls, and boys.
Mm-hmm.
So that never left me, but I suppressed it a lot, and I experienced gay bashing when I was older and had to go into the closet, and then would go in and out of the closet depending on what was happening. And there was also a big taboo in the industry where you couldn't talk about these deep things that were happening. And also, this was way prior to the Me Too movement, the things that I went through and other child actors. So does that explain it? Because
it explains it, and B, it just came out. I love it. And thank you, Simone. What a thrill to be sitting here up here with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Are you
Simone.
kidding?
And I want my piece. Okay.
Hi,
Martian.
I'm Martian, and I have the dolls in the entryway, and I'm better at Q&A, but I'll just try this format out.
I can ask you questions if you want.
Well, prompt me if needed.
Okay.
So I have a foot in the performance art world. Mark Simon's been to almost all of them. With Growing Up Linda was about the heir to the throne of the Carvel Cake Ice Cream Empire, the fictitious heir to the throne. And there was another performance inspired by Jocelyn Wildenstein, the cat lady. And so then my next piece, I just saw this clip on the internet of this woman who was making love to an amusement park ride. And it just made me have all sorts of questions, like, can the amusement park ride consent? Could she get tetanus? Like, what else could happen? And so I watched the documentary, and it turns out it's called Married to the Eiffel Tower. And so that inspired, because after the Jocelyn Wildenstein piece, I wanted to start making things more fictionalized instead of like directly inspired by one person. So they inspired the characters for this performance called Object of Her Affection, about an object sexual named Andrea who falls off a building she was in love with. And she flashes back, back to the documentary. It was, there was like a scene where her mom like showed her Raggedy Ann doll collection. It was just like 3 seconds, but I was just fascinated by the mom, and she became the grandmother in the piece. But even before I made the performance, I wanted to go to this puppetry conference, and we could propose lectures, and it was called like puppetry and post-dramatic performance. So I was thinking of all these puppetry adjacent mediums like masking and like people that wear masks for sexual gratification, and furries.
For what?
For sexual gratification.
Thank you.
And furries, and then there, like I was really interested in object sexuality because I was also interested in animism. And it also seems to touch on hoarding too. So I gave this lecture, and then I wanted to make a performance, and so it was inspired by this documentary. It was about an object sexual who's fallen from a building she's in love with, and then it flashes back to all of her loves, starting with a baby's blanket, a bad boy hunting rifle, the Berlin Wall that doesn't end so well.
That was a beautiful, beautiful piece. I saw it.
It was really good.
And it's I'll just summarize, complicated relationships with monumental public structures. But then she settles for Roy, a dumpy tenement, and he's crumbling, and she's sort of chased off by the grandma and the police. So that's sad. Okay, spoiler alert. So then it was 2015, and I got the Cola Fellowship to do a show at L'Image in Barnsdall, Los Angeles Municipal Art Gallery. And I really wanted to explore the grandmother's world in depth because I had fun making the dolls with my hairdresser, Liz. And so there was a studio visit, and I posted like a handful of dolls. I had no intention of making this many at first. I posted a photo of it, and then this real life grandmother named Sharon Challenger saw the picture of the dolls from across the country, and she wanted to chip in, so I mailed her patterns and polyfill and stuffing and materials, gift cards, pizza money, and then that seemed to inspire a lot of other people who wanted to help me. So we just stayed in, including Debra. So we stayed in for a year and watched like all of the 2015 presidential speeches and made these dolls. And somewhere along the way, I thought like, this would be really cool. Like, what would it be like if I buried some of them underground? And then that, it actually wasn't that severe. So then this Hollywood costume designer donated all this like clean way to make things dirty, like these like dusts that cause cancer and stuff. So I tried that, and
Hollywood.
Hollywood
cancer.
And if that wasn't cancerous enough, I put them in the oven too. And
One day I went to your house.
Oh, yeah.
And you had just put bleached dolls in the oven, and it was bad in there.
I know, I should really get like an art oven or something. There was one day when there was like a fire too, and doll number 13 is my favorite. It's just a face. I don't know what happened to the body. There's a couple that don't have bodies. So anyway, there was this room at L'Image, and I wanted to create the grandmother's world, and so I ended up with 1,248 dolls. And I just want to thank some of the people like Christine Papalexis, Tim Lagos, Liz Brown, Olan, and there's a lot of people. It's all on my website. So anyway, I made this mountain of dolls and a centerpiece of a grandmother presiding from the throne of her wingback chair. And then for the opening, I performed with them. I wore this suit covered in dolls, and I don't know why, but people thought that they were like, it's a robot. Oh, there's a mannequin of somebody behind the robot. And it was like, I could hear everything that people said. And that's when I saw you and Cherie Rose. I was like, hi.
That's right.
Yeah. And,
It's because no one expected a performer in your installation.
I guess
And
so.
so everyone thought it was a robot. because
Right.
No one expected there to be a performative aspect, and it was so you were invisibly performing with a grandma petting the dolls.
Yeah.
It was very sweet.
Oh yeah, and that was the other thing, sorry. Like all my performances are really talky. Like they use a lot of words. And
Surprise.
yeah, surprise. And I'd go to the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center for their puppetry conference. Actually, that's where a lot of doll helpers came from too. And I took this workshop with this woman named Alice from Germany who just does movement, and one of her big things was just to make dolls breathe. And so I really just wanted to make the doll breathe, the grandmother doll. So all she did was breathe and pet the doll and like rock, and people thought that it was a robot. So
I have a couple questions for you. Since you
okay,
said
let's go. Let's do
Let's
it.
go with some questions.
Okay, and it's true about the anti-vaxxer thing. They're really not, but it was a conspiracy theory. It's on Wikipedia.
I believe that you believe that.
It's true. It's a true conspiracy theory.
It's a true conspiracy.
Enough to be on a Wikipedia
that
page.
someone told you that I believe they told you. But
It's there.
about the dolls? The
Yeah.
dolls are anti-vaxxers.
They're not really, but people believed them to be.
The dolls are anti-vaxxers.
Because they were given to somebody in a hospital, and I don't
Wait,
think
so
it
dolls
went
can
so
carry
well.
measles?
I don't
Kind of
really
like the
know.
blankets that
Like-
we gave to
and
the
Like
Indians?
the Velveteen Rabbit.
Rabbit.
Yeah.
All right, let's get away from the Velveteen
Okay,
Rabbit for a
all right,
moment.
it's basic,
And
sorry.
the highfalutin children's books
Right.
made of velveteen. And let's bring it back to Drag 16.
Okay, got
So,
it.
I know, because I had a conversation with each of these artists, as one would do if you're going to moderate a panel like this with such illustrious artists. And so Martian and I talked, we talked about somebody who shall remain nameless from some organization who shall remain nameless.
I am
who
blanking.
gave you, I'm glad you're blanking because you're going to
Okay.
be even more candid in your answer.
Okay.
That gave you a note about we both, Marshall and I both kind of make work that's public practice, but we fucking hate that term. I hate that term.
I didn't think it. Oh, I know what you're saying.
You know where I'm going, yeah. And so then he applied for this grant.
Or they
Sorry,
applied.
they.
It's okay.
So he's a they. I fucked it up. Don't you fuck it up. I'm here to fuck
Don't
it up.
apologize to me. Just like it's
Yeah.
not my job
No, but
to
look,
comfort.
I'm here as Christ for their
Okay.
sins. Like, I fucked it up. So you can now not fuck it up. They told me, y'all told me.
It's gonna be really difficult when all
let's
the
move to
porn
the
is like
question,
they
though.
looked at them and then they looked at them. And
I
then,
know.
okay, yeah.
It's very Duran Duran.
Okay,
You know, everyone's
anyway.
old enough in here to get that reference. But in
Sure.
any case, they gave you a note
I'm being a hostile witness.
about seeing. That's okay. I like hostility.
Yeah, they gave me a note.
I'm Puerto Rican, it's all right.
Okay.
But it's like the note was that your work, they told him that basically his work needed to involve more of a social practice element, which is as trendy as fucking jeggings right now in the art world. And we discussed it, and I was really freaked out about this note, because I knew where the doll. So I want you to answer.
And I
where the
have
dolls
really
came
bad
from.
self-esteem because I'm not an untrained social worker artist, and it seems like that's where everything's going nowadays. But I do, not to insult anyone, but I do feel like maybe at least 75% of the people had something that could have been in the DSM-4 or 5. So, and then this person wanted me to hook up with a mental health organization, and I just I'm not a trained social worker, but every time they'd come over, they'd do like one stitch, and then it would become all about them and their experience with creepy dolls as a child, and how traumatic that was.
Yeah,
And how
so-
creepy, and they all use the word creepy.
So we discussed this feedback that he got from a panel. This
They got.
That they got. See, I'm here to mess up for you. I'm gonna mess up again.
They're like the Oprah. He's the Oprah.
Every time I mess up, it means that you can't. So they told y'all, that they needed to be more like involved in social practice in their art practice. Yet here is this artist that was already engaged in social practice, that was already doing this, that's already been doing this. And that's kind of one of my problems with the current art world and art lingo, in a way, is that they're expecting us and them and they and y'all to like fit into this weird box where like we're already doing it. Like, why are you talking?
I wasn't trained as a social
But
worker.
you're already doing
However, Marcus and I both discovered that we shared this background in activism. Like, I helped get queer rights law passed for high school students, and we were both involved in Needle Exchange ACT UP, and I was like, how am I gonna put that in my bio? Does it relate to anything? And then we're gonna sit down at some point.
But I think that it does.
The way you do everything's the way you do anything.
Exactly. But I feel like your dolls kind of are harm reduction in a way.
Right, because who knows what I'd be doing if I wasn't making them.
Yes, his practice is keeping us all very safe.
Yeah.
Well, also, I have another question I have for you.
What else?
Well, here it comes.
Okay.
What I also loved about how when we had our conversation, it's kind of you kind of talked about your work kind of as a selfie trap in a way. That's my term, or a term. And it's like it is like what's it, Meow Wolf? Like there is this like weird culture now that's happening around.
It's like the Contemporary Art Museum is Funhouse, like where they even make pop-up ones just with a hashtag, just so people on hookup apps can take their selfie there. Like, we all have seen those people with the syphilis dots behind them at, what's that artist?
Yaya Kusama?
Yeah, her. Yeah. You know, it's just broadcasting it so we all know ahead of time.
I love how you call it syphilis dots.
Yeah, so, I don't know, I've been making faces like ever since I was a kid, so like that's almost a form of selfie. And the Raggedy Ann dolls do have over-accentuated facial features, but then also I just wanted to write my own tour guide speech, so I did. And I said something like, it once wanted to be wallpaper and a adoption agency for an all-kill animal shelter. Like they're looking at, they each vie for attention with the intensity of an all-kill animal shelter.
Did you ever see the puppet show that was based on the Dennis Cooper story about the serial killer? There was this French guy, and it was like 3 puppets, and
I'm just gonna say yes.
yeah. Anyway, your work, actually, all of your works, like Simone's, Debra's, like there is like a darkness.
Are you plugging my new piece about serial killers?
I thought he was saying all of us were probably serial killers.
I had to personalize it. Sorry, I made it about me.
Well, it is your time right now.
Okay.
So this really is.
Yeah, we
this is
all
your
are
moment.
dark. There are some, I was noticing when I talked with Simone too, I think it's really cool that these are all self-portraits, and I feel similarly that I pick these weird people that I find on the internet to make multi-year performances inspired by, but it's really about my story, and maybe I didn't sleep with an amusement park ride, but can't we all relate?
Of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Of course.
But the 3 of you do share. There is like
And Debra's has something about her childhood with the bunny with the prolapsed anus that has a bunch of ears coming out of it. And I don't know what that means, but she can tell you.
there's I'm forgetting the name of the writer. I didn't say it, but she did. She said Puerto Vallarta is a sunny place for shady people. And as a Los Angeles native,
I need to go on
when
vacation.
I read that, I felt like Los Angeles is a sunny place for shady people. And this show, in a way, kind of exemplified that.
That's pretty legit.
And not in terms of the artists themselves, but in terms of the shade that's like really inherent in the dolls, in the collages, and the lesbian porn, and like the darkness of these animals that are so twisted and beautiful, and like you know, I'm not gonna say what I was thinking. But
Say it.
No.
Okay.
Just but like the plastic surgery sort of culture of Los Angeles of people that come to Los
The
Angeles.
cat people.
It's like the Swan.
You know.
Does anyone remember
Yeah.
that
Yes.
reality?
Yes.
It's like
yes.
the Swan.
And
Yes.
so I just wanted to now open it up to
Like a wound.
like a festering wound. Get it right.
A long-term fissure.
2 questions. Are you guys ready for questions now?
Yeah.
Sure.
Let's have some.
If
Well,
anyone-
please raise your hand.
Does anyone have any questions?
Make it about yourself and your
questions?
childhood.
Martian's a
Sean has a question.
unqualified social worker.
Yeah, I realized that, you know, when the show is about done, the show is about installed, it's opening night, I think, and like, noticed that there's something extra on the wall. Deborah, you added, there's kind of a 25th and a half piece on the wall, and I never really talked to you about where that's coming from. What inspired you to add that?
So there is an extra rabbit. There's a 25 and a half, and he's in the corner on the left, like near your knee. If you want to go look for him, he's like disappearing. So there's a little tail and 2 ears that just disappear into the wall. That's sort of like the rabbit going into the like vortex or the rabbit hole, or like disappearing into the other dimension. I think what I always thought of what it was like the Twilight Zone. There's an episode of the Twilight Zone where this guy goes into a vortex that he finds behind his bookcase. And if no one's seen it, they should be watching more of those Twilight Zone marathons that are on New Year's. Anyway, and so it sort of reminded me of that, like being able to disappear into this other dimension. And I happened to have a tail and a couple of ears hanging around when I was getting ready to install. And I always like to make, almost every show I do, I try to make like a little extra, like an extra thing somewhere, like a hiding thing or a secret thing that's hard to see or hard to find, and maybe isn't really a piece, but it's in the show. And so that's why I made you a disappearing rabbit.
Hey, Sean, I have to go to the bathroom. Can you come up here and moderate for like 3 minutes and take audience questions while I go to the bathroom? 3, maybe 2.
Good luck, Marcus.
You need your cane?
Take your cane.
Take your cane. Take your cane.
We'll come check on you in a couple minutes.
I need to get my beverage that's across the way.
Okay, see, everyone has to do something.
I'm here.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, Simone went before the talk. Any other questions after that disappearing bunny in the wall?
You have one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you, yeah.
So listening to Marcus and Simone warms my heart because we have such a history. And I'm not going to get into that history, but it's enduring and loving and creatively intense. And so I'm really thank you and thank Marcus. He will let go. But there's something about the work tonight. I love this trio. I love this pairing as a trio, right? And I hadn't thought about sentimentality before your artist talk, and this idea of kind of taking things that we place what I consider kind of strange value on, like a doll is such a potent symbol. And, Simone uses the term that I love called the golden age of porn, which we never had a chance to actually sit down with. You know, these kind of pin-up, the sentiment of a pin-up, or the kind of what that symbolizes if you have a pin-up in your garage, you're really a dude, you know, and the kind of tchotchke or the kitsch, you know, things that people have. So sentimentality is something that came up, a word that came up during the artist talk. So I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that specifically or give me a little bit more insight.
Yeah, and to piggyback on your question, actually, like there is a lot of like emotion and love, like on like you each there are the objects, the bunnies, the these things, like there's clearly like a lot of emotional investment. So
True, and I love bunnies too, and I hate that they're being experimented on. And with these farming cages, it's really nightmarish. So I've been making more bunny drawings too to go with the pinups. But Kurt and I worked on a series together that we collaborated on, which is at the One Library. And I love that series. So I wanted to say thank you. We had a lot of fun. And then we also worked together with Asher and Marcus as well. And then Brian and I worked together on a project, and Patrick cast both of us in a few of his projects. So I'm so happy they're here with me tonight too. I'm just happy to be here with everybody. And this wonderful show with Marcian and Debra.
I think that's a really good point, that there is a lot of sentimentality in all our works. And I think the interesting thing about the three of us is, I think sometimes people's reaction to, I know definitely mine, I know oftentimes yours, and I would guess also Simone's, is that sometimes people have like a aversion to the work with the pinups. Sometimes people might find pinups to be, maybe somewhat offensive or risque, and sometimes people find the iterations of the dolls to be, it's like, why are they distressed the way they are?
Because you're boring.
Right. Well, or like with me, like, why are those rabbits like that? It's like people want to question why are things like they are. But I think that each of us make things like they are because we do feel sentimental about it, and there is a lot of love and emotion in making something maybe instead of the way it is, like the way it should be. And that might, and so maybe some people see that, like, the way we think it should be, they might think that that's wrong. But maybe they're wrong. I mean, it is the way it should be. And so I think there is a lot of sentimentality in that, like the action of creating something and making it the way it's supposed to be. Instead of the way everyone tells us it's going to be like.
Well, we touched on that in a little bit of our conversation about.
Dave.
I'd like to piggyback on that, Oink. So I feel like I have a locational-based memory that's also very associative. So when I'm walking with someone and we pass by the same spot, like the same story comes up, or when I'm scrubbing the floor and it's the same tile, like I'll have the same memory. I don't know, maybe it's just me. But I feel that way about the dolls too. There's a lot of, like, I think about like that person I had to haggle to help me with the fringe on the dress, or like the conversation we had when we were making the eyes. And then also Louise Bourgeois, is that how you say her name? No.
Bourgeois.
Yeah, Bourgeois. Okay, great. So she said that the act of sewing is the art of sewing is the process of emotional repair. You can fact check me. And I do feel that. Like I was thinking about a lot of memories and like a breakup that happened, and I started making more dolls. So now there's like maybe 1,500 of them. I lost count. But there's something to the repetition and then they're also like crying. There's tears coming out of their eyes too, and their smiles are stitched on. So I do feel like there's definitely emotion in there too.
Definitely.
But as a practitioner of like several spiritual traditions of the African diaspora, like for me walking in, the first time I walked in and saw the show, like I felt like these were sacred objects. Like the dolls were just like really spoke to me. Like I could hear each one of them in my imagination, and like the bunnies felt like something I would see in a botanica, you know, and like these images here like seemed like something I'd see like in San Salvador, you know, like they seem like bombajita, like they really felt. I'm projecting like my own practice onto these objects, of course, but I just really felt like there were these like they're powerful totems and like these powerful objects that you guys are engaging and creating, and so I'm wondering how how you feel when you make these things. Like how does it feel to like cut the ears off? Like how does it feel to like burn the doll? Like how does it feel? How does it feel? How does it feel?
I don't have fingerprints like after this show. Like my phone doesn't work with them. I have to put the passcode in.
They can't get into their phone anymore.
Because they got kind of sanded off.
That's how it physically feels.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, when when I'm cutting up ceramics, I collect things because I want them to, like, I don't know, I want them to sort of have this sense of safety of being with me, which I know they're not real, so that doesn't really make any sense, but that's beside the point. But when I'm cutting them up, I know that they're going to be something else, and sort of so in my head I tell them, like, we're all going to be okay here. You're going to be something else, and you're going to be better than you were. And then that's sort of the process of like how to make them is knowing that the end result is going to be better than the process, which I guess you could just like make that some kind of metaphor for life, like the pain you go through is going to make you better for it in the end, or whatever you're going through now is you're going to come out at the other side maybe something else, but maybe better than what you were.
This relates to the question, I'm always looking for snobby words for puppetry because I want it to be taken seriously. So it was like object theater, and then materials performance became one of them. And then this really smart tenure-tracked person was like vibrant matter. And I Googled it, and there's this woman that gives lectures on it, and it's about the connection between hoarders and animism. And just like we have so many emotional attachments to all of the objects in our life, or maybe not all of them, or maybe there's a particular one. And when I did that performance object of perfection, I did these like audience demographic surveys just because I wanted to have something to say to the grant people, and I asked like, what are some of the objects that you have an emotional attachment to? And I think like rocks was like one of the top things.
That's interesting because rocks are really at the center of many spiritual traditions across the globe.
Mm-hmm. Vibrators was like a close third.
I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, but I didn't answer.
Oh, so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'll
just doing my job.
No, you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Emotional access.
Emotional access. Well, I've always had a strong connection, like I said before, with pinups and animals, and I work intuitively, but I also do a lot of research, and I'm very emotionally involved in the work, also with painting. Many years ago, I took an acid trip, and the buildings were melting in beautiful colors, and I never forgot that image, which stayed for so many hours and just kept going and going and going and going until the acid left my body. But I never forgot it, and then when I started painting all these years later, it was like I was going through the same experience, but not on the drug of LSD. It was just in my body and coming out that way, and it's a spiritual thing, but it's also emotional for me. Making my work is very emotional, and it also helps me with auditions and my acting as well. They feed each other. Okay, so that's my answer.
Thank you, Simone. Anyone have one last question?
I just have one comment, Simone. I'm trying to remember the play when we were in at track 16 at Vermont Station. There's something about an elephant.
Yes!
That was fabulous.
Oh,
I'll
thank
never forget the image of you with that huge background.
Wait, didn't you work on that, Kurt?
Kurt was in it too.
Yeah, Kurt was, was that?
Asher directed it. Yeah, I love that play.
Yeah, that's
See,
fabulous.
Simone was supposed to embody the elephant.
Yes, I was
Yeah.
supposed to be the elephant.
Yeah.
And you did a great
You
job.
know,
Oh God, thank you.
Okay, so any last words? We'll start with
I
Simone.
was also in an elephant play as a child. We wore paper bags and had trunks. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Last words, Simone?
I'm just happy to be in this great show, and I'm really grateful. I'm gonna start crying, so.
I'm just gonna agree with Simone, and I want to say thank you to her and Martian and Sean for
And Cesar.
and Cesar, because
Cesar,
Cesar put up
please.
the shelves
Yes.
and like feeded
Yeah.
the
Yes.
Yes,
And also thank you
And
to
Tom.
Marcus, which
And
I
all of you, because
Yes,
it
and
wouldn't
all
be
of you.
anything if nobody saw it.
Exactly, and thank you so much for coming. So wonderful.
I'm just glad I got to make all these rabbits.
I love your bunnies, by the way, and I love your dolls.
And thank you, Track 16. It's an honor and privilege.
We
to
learned
be
a lot
here,
about
with
ourselves
these
and other
artists.
people.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Track 16. Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Marshall. Thank you, Debra.